Hello and welcome to the Talking Green webinar. This month, we've been discussing all things business sustainability in a four-part podcast series in partnership with Nedbank Commercial Banking. And today, we get to welcome all our guests back for our Talking Green webinar. My name is Nozi Shabalala, and I'm your host. With me today, I have Mark Boshoff. He's the head of sustainability at Nedbank Commercial Banking. Mark, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Nozi. I look forward to this discussion.
Absolutely. And of course, joining us as well is Nick Headley. He is an energy and climate science journalist. Nick, welcome back to you.
Thanks for having me, Nozi.
And we're rounding it off with Tula Zondi, and he is a communications officer at Green Cape, which of course is an organization that works with businesses to provide market insight on these very topics. Tula, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Nozi, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation.
So let's get right into it. And maybe I'm going to just start off by trying to paint a picture of the current status as we see it. And Nick, maybe I want to kick off with you. And to really get your thoughts on the broader global energy transition that we're seeing at a macro level. How would you say South Africa is faring in terms of its own transition efforts?
So South Africa is still a very long way behind the rest of the world, including other developing markets. We're starting to play catch up, but we've got a really long way to go. So coal still accounts for about 85% of our electricity mix, and we've kind of made very little, almost negligible progress when it comes to things like electric vehicles and decarbonizing heavy industry. Just for some sort of context to explain where we are in the global position, about 2/3 of Latin America's electricity comes from low carbon sources, a little bit of nuclear, but almost entirely renewables, specifically wind and hydro, and also a lot of solar in places like Chile. Uruguay just ran on 100% renewables for 4 months straight, and wind was the biggest contributor there in the mix. And then, elsewhere in the world, there's places like Denmark, Portugal, and the state of South Australia, which are kind of 3 or 4 years away from getting to pretty much 100% renewables. So when you look at us still at about maybe 11% renewables, we are a very long way behind the rest of the world. That said, though, things are starting to change, and that's partly because of those new rules that came into effect in South Africa a year or two ago, which basically allowed private companies to start investing in their own electricity supply. So we've got a pipeline of about 65 gigawatts of renewable energy in the pipeline, sort of projects that private companies hope to develop. A lot of that won't happen because we have major grid constraints, just because South Africa hasn't invested nearly enough in its grid that it should have. But a lot of it will. So there's a sort of flood of clean energy projects now in the pipeline. So we're starting to play catch up, but we do have a very long way to go.
Yeah, I think that's a very balanced view. So interesting to hear some of the geographies that we would hold as competitors in the global south, as an example, but also some real numbers. If only 11% of our grid is constituted of renewable energy, there's still a lot to put into that pipeline. So maybe, Mark, let me come to you, because we know at the core of this is really about business being a part of the solution. And during this series, we've learned a lot about some of the challenges that businesses have faced in terms of really successfully migrating their businesses towards more sustainable solutions. Yes, there has been some progress that has been noted, but I suppose the question to you, Mark, is how far would you say the process has come for businesses over the last few years, especially when it comes to funding some of these transition initiatives?
Nozi, I think we've made good progress. Just looking at where we've come from, and if maybe we can take a step back and look at where we've come from. Initially, there was very limited knowledge of the users. What should they be using? What should they be doing? Where can they go? How do they go about it? Type of thing. There was also limited solutions available. I mean, at one stage, green financing was solely solar or renewable energy. It's subsequently grown into most of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, all 17 of them. You can find most of them have solutions. And then there was also very limited funding product that was available. It was sort of done business as usual, and it didn't fit because it's a totally different asset with a different perspective and a different purpose. So where are we now? I think we have a wealth of knowledge that is just building up as more and more articles are written, as more and more advisors come onto the scene, as more research is done, journalism, those kinds of things. So the knowledge is really is growing. The range of solutions is improving. It's becoming every day you hear of something new. The other day I was reading about solar panels, which are now actually your window panes. No longer put them on your roof; they fit into your window panes. Those kinds of things. So it's coming on, and similar with water and those kinds of things. But then with funding, we're seeing such a big development where government subsidies are coming in, government grants. We're seeing tax breaks. We're seeing financing or new financial products that are coming out there. So I think that access is improving tremendously. But at the end of the day, it still remains how buoyant is your economy. And our economy is stagnating at this stage. People and businesses are struggling. And you may have access to finance, but if you can't afford that finance, it's going to be very difficult to get it. So a mixed bag of an answer there.
Yeah, it's certainly a mixed bag, but I think you make such a good point of linking it back to the macro. It does boil down to the health of the economy, but really exciting news to hear about some of the new financial products that are coming on board. And of course, the likes of Nick, who are actually doing their job and lifting that narrative to the surface and getting more and more people talking about, going green. So, Tula, let's bring your voice into the conversation right now. We know that Green Cape works with businesses on the ground. So this is a beautiful transition from the global picture from Nick, Mark giving us some of what's happening at the national level, and now to you to give us a little bit of the voice of what's actually coming out at the local level. How would you describe the uptake by businesses to adopt some innovative ways to be more sustainable?
I think as a starting point, Nozi, I should say that there is gaining momentum when it comes to how businesses are incorporating environmentally friendly practices into their operations. And some of those things are a contribution of factors such as consumer demand. So, with Green Cape having to work with businesses, we experience basically some of the good stories that businesses have come up with. There's a growing environmental brand awareness amongst consumers that has led to an increased demand for sustainable products and services. And there's also innovation. We run a Green Pitch Challenge where we see some of these technologies being presented in these challenges. I think also the drive basically comes from government regulations when it comes to implementing stricter environmental regulations. And this has incentivized businesses to adopt sustainable practices to comply with law. The one other one, which is a huge factor for businesses, is cost savings. Many of them adopt sustainable practices such as energy efficiency and waste reduction that lead in the long run to cost savings. And I think for businesses, that is the most crucial thing.
Yeah, it's an incredible answer, because what I'm hearing is different ingredients that are coming to the fore. You talk about technologies, you talk about the regulatory environment, you talk about the incentives for business around cost savings, and all of these things together are actually creating these good stories that are bubbling up to the surface. But let's maybe have a balanced conversation. I want to talk a little bit about the challenges as well. And Nick, I'm going to come back to you for this one. What would you describe as the number one challenge that is really currently challenging the South African economy as a whole? And do you believe that there are some key insights that you can share with us that could really help our audience probably just like better understand this challenge better?
Sure. Well, I think one underappreciated challenge, which is the whole sort of rationale behind the energy transition in the first place, is the threat of climate change. It's understandably very low down on people's list of worries in a country where the unemployment rate is shockingly high, where inequality is just at obscene levels, and we have so many other things to worry about, including crime. But it is unfortunately a very underappreciated problem, and something that we do need to create more awareness about, and that is the threat of climate change. Um, Longer term, there's some really severe things to worry about, but it's already affecting us in a lot of ways that people don't quite maybe appreciate. The first way is heat stress, which is it's a again just a not something that's not taken particularly seriously because it seems like quite an abstract sort of concept, but um, we've recently seen temperature records tumbling across the country in the past couple of weeks through some mega heat waves that, I mean, the kinds of which we haven't really seen before. And that has a really big impact on labor productivity, especially in sectors like construction, agriculture, and manufacturing, sort of where there's heavy labor involved. And there are numerous studies, mainly in other markets, but some also do look at South Africa on how that affects labor productivity and how, in turn, that affects economic output. The second very immediate impact, which most people haven't really sort of put two and two together before, but there's again plenty of studies showing a very clear link, is the impact of extreme weather on food output and food prices. So we've already seen droughts and floods and heat waves obviously becoming a lot more intense and a lot more frequent, and there's plenty of data to show that that's the case. And that's affecting crop yields in South Africa and around the world. And in both cases, that affects us. So we've seen domestic food production, including things like grapes and wine output, take a hit because of abnormal extreme weather. And things that are happening elsewhere in the world also affects our economy, like how the output of rice at the moment in places like India is taking a serious hit, and that's pushing up the prices of rice in South Africa and making things tougher for consumers everywhere, particularly lower income consumers, actually. And then on the other sort of end of the spectrum, there's what's happening in the cocoa economies in West Africa, which have seen their lowest output in decades because of some seriously unusual and extreme weather in those parts of the world. So I do think those are immediate challenges which are not well understood, but the impacts of climate change are only going to get worse. So we do need to improve our climate literacy in the country.
Yeah, and I think the point you started off with, Nick, is just so important, and that is how crowded the global agenda is, and in particularly for the countries that are most impacted. And some of those countries are sitting right here on the African continent, and just the challenge of having to, address some of the more primary concerns, or what appears to be primary concerns, like poverty and hunger and healthcare. But when as you explain all of these things, you see how interlinked they are, and how important addressing climate change is, and how underappreciated it really is. I'm sitting in the middle of a heat wave in Johannesburg right now as we have this conversation. So, an absolute appreciation for what you are talking about. Tula, let me just come back to you. I mean, you started to talk to us a little bit about good stories to tell that are coming up from the local level. What are you hearing from businesses and from industry stakeholders when they come to Green Cape asking for assistance? What's the big ask that keeps repeating itself?
Nozi, we just had some of the workshops for UNIDO, and one of the things that we wanted to look at was the wastewater treatment works plans, and we spoke to some financiers as well. So I think the one word that is always buzzing is capex. So the initial cost associated with implementing some of these sustainable practices or technologies. I think access to funding is one of the most concerning one. There's also some challenges when it comes to regulatory compliance. I think that between government and the innovators, there should be a way where they meet each other halfway. Some of the regulations are too strict, and they don't allow for that to then happen. I think also technology integration. They speak about technologies being expensive. However, there are other ways in which some of the businesses have taken, I'd say incentive in a way that when it comes to rooftop solar PVs, for instance, there is finance, finance zero access when it comes to such innovations, where there's stuff like power purchasing or lease agreements. So those are some of the, I'd say, minor but very crucial challenges that we hear about.
Yeah, I think you've shared a couple of C's here. There's a capex, there's the compliance, and the cost of technology integration. I think it's a very useful way of thinking about some of the things that are coming up. But I know that Mark, you would be quite interested in the first response, the capex conversation, as Tula is talking about the access to funding. And when you reflect on that, Mark, what would you say is one of the hurdles or the key hurdle that has been overcome over the last few years when we think about business and their pursuit of access to funding renewable energy? And we could look at renewable energy equipment as an example. Are we making progress? Is businesses finding a way around the challenges of accessing capital?
Very much so, Nozi. I agree with Tula that there was a problem some time ago with access to finance, and one's got to be very careful how you define access to finance. Access to finance can have many meanings.
Yeah.
The one is, people just don't have access to bank accounts or whatever the case may be, or it's you can't afford it, or any variations thereon. But with the time that's elapsed since we've seen the first solar finance go up, and we've seen the first sustainability finance or funding operations happen, a lot of time has elapsed. And one of the hurdles that has been overcome there is exactly what Tula is speaking about, is the product had to grow with it. As I mentioned earlier, most banks would offer asset-based finance, the typical one that you would finance your car with if you were looking to pay it off and that. But it was based based on a vehicle that had registration numbers and serial numbers and all those kinds of things. It could be used as an asset to support that, and it often required, or most of the time requires, deposits, and there's a whole host of things that go into that. But let's take renewable energy, for example. It's a totally different animal. It reaches its payback period much later in the process. Evidence is showing that it's between 6 and 7 years before this equipment starts paying itself back. And if you think of a factory equipment or anything like that, it's most probably in the first year. It's already starting to produce income and breaking even in those things. So the product had to grow with those. So the first thing is that you see across the banks is an extended period to repay the loans, up to 10 years or so. You're seeing a lot of banks now saying, well, we won't take a deposit on this. The reason being very much what Tula said, the capex, the capital, that working capital. At the end of the day, one wants to be able to walk into your factory or your operations or whatever it is, switch on the light and your electricity is there. That's what we pay electricity for and that. But it's not the case. So sustainability funding is almost becoming a grudge purchase because you've got to pay for something that you should be getting normally. So we've had to look at very carefully at how can we limit that working capital that is vital for a business flowing out into what you can call, if you want to, a non-core asset. So we've said no deposits are required unless there's issues with the client's credit worthiness. We've allowed the VAT rebate that they get, or the capital rebate, we've allowed that to be put into the loan as well, almost like a post deposit. We've also taken into effect exactly what Tula was talking about, the savings. You're generating electricity and you no longer have to purchase that electricity from the municipality or from Eskom. So in effect, that savings that you're now making, that you're generating the electricity almost for free, you can use that to structure the loan in such a way that the repayment comes very close to what you're saving in electricity. But let's not forget, Nosy, that so many people actually put in generators. And if you think what diesel has done over the last couple of months and years, that saving is also now brought into effect because you no longer have to switch the generator on unless you've got a backup to a backup. So there's been a lot of innovation to make the asset cheaper and more affordable for anyone. But as I said, with our first question that we discussed, it only helps those people that are in a good financial standing. You've still got an issue with people that may not have that kind of facility or that limit available to them. And maybe that's where the big challenge for the future lies.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent response because we're not only understanding, the innovation that's happened around the financing instruments, but also realizing that, the challenge probably lies in a different space now when we talk about access to finance. But one of the things, and Mark, I just want to stay with you a little bit because, you talk about a lot of different things that have happened in order to make financing a little bit more accessible. What would you say the biggest incentive is now for businesses to start taking their continuity seriously? And in order for Nedbank Commercial Banking to really begin to support their transition?
Nosy, I could answer that in one word, but it wouldn't build into a conversation then. But the one word is survival. That is the biggest incentive of sustainability. I love the idea that Nick has brought climate resilience into the conversation because that's exactly where Nedbank is going as well. We're seeing sustainable or sustainability financing as a subset of climate resilience. How do you overcome climate resilience? And when I say survival, yes, I'm including the survival of the human race, the survival of the planet, everything that lives and breathes on it and all that. But I'm specifically from a business concept here, talking about survival of your business. Climate resilience has become one of the biggest risks that business people must take into consideration when they're designing their business and looking at their business. And when I say that, I'm actually going so far, and I stand up wherever I get a chance to say this, is when you work on your business continuity plan, what's going to happen when my computers go down? What happens when there's some kind of disaster recovery that is required? Climate risk is becoming that. Think of floods, think of droughts, think of your supply chain collapsing, think of your clients saying, I'm very sorry, I'm not going to be buying from you anymore because you've got a terrible reputation as being a polluter or somebody that doesn't subscribe to the SDGs. So one's got to be so careful on so many aspects as to what this is all about for your business, for your employees, for your clients, and for your suppliers. It's a complete eco cycle, if you want to call it that. So the one word is survival, and I think I'm going to close with that.
Yeah, it's a powerful word to start with and to close with, because really it brings so much meaning to the S in ESG investment in particular. But as you're saying, the risks are real. Imagine a supply chain collapsing. I mean, that has real business ramifications. And I certainly believe that anybody who's a business leader listening to this is certainly wanting to ensure that their business can withstand anything that could happen. And so survival is absolutely key. I want to stay in this optimistic note that we're in. And Nick, when we started this conversation, we started off asking you about the macro level and what was happening in the macro level. It was a little bit of a bleak picture, if I'm a little bit honest with you. So I'm going to push a little bit now to ask you to source your optimism for us. What would be the one thing that would make you more optimistic if South Africa and South African industry in particular could embrace as we all try to move collectively towards our energy transition goals?
So there are two sides to this coin. There's, on the one side, there's big risks, and as a corporate being locked out of the world economy because of things like carbon border taxes and supply chain risks and all of that. But on the other side of that same coin, there's massive opportunities. And South Africa actually has an opportunity to reindustrialize itself as the global energy transition kind of advances. And that's because, firstly, the world's going to need a huge amount of our minerals, things like manganese, which is a key mineral needed in batteries. And we have the world's best reserves of manganese there. Things like platinum, which are key to the green hydrogen economy. We have about 80% of the world's platinum reserves. But also an opportunity to value add and reindustrialize that way. So I think one great example here is ArcelorMittal a couple of years ago shut down its steel plant on South Africa's west coast. It had just become unprofitable and unviable in the face of very steep electricity price increases and load shedding and all of that. It's now looking to reopen that plant specifically to target the global energy transition. And that by that, I mean the world's particularly advanced economies like Europe want clean green steel. And now ArcelorMittal has an opportunity to do that by converting its steel plants on the west coast to run on green hydrogen and make very low carbon steel, which it can sell at a premium in Europe and countries like and markets like that. So we have a huge opportunity to become a producer of low carbon goods, specifically things like low carbon steel, fertilizer, cement, and things like that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we can, together with other Southern African countries, we could become a battery manufacturing hub. We have all of the necessary minerals. We have existing battery manufacturing capabilities. Same in hydrogen, we have almost unrivaled potential in green hydrogen. To be honest, we've got all of the ingredients. We know how to make hydrogen. We know we have 80% of the world's platinum reserves, which are needed for hydrogen, and we have some of the best solar and wind resources, which are needed to make green hydrogen. And again, that's green hydrogen can be used to power your heavy industrial processes, which means you can sell things for a big premium because they're low carbon. There's also opportunities. I mean, slightly smaller scale, but almost equally as impactful, are in like green mobility solutions. So things like e-bikes and electric scooters, which I think personally, this is just a personal opinion, that that's an opportunity to bring people, in, specifically in townships, sort of transport independence, and giving them more formal links to the formal economy. So I think there are huge opportunities everywhere in this global energy transition for South Africa.
Yeah, that's a lot more optimism in there, Nick. I mean, that list was pretty impressive. I absolutely love the idea of transport independence as just one of the many ideas. You know, the story of ArcelorMittal reopening up is such a fantastic, good story to tell for the country. And of course, as we look at all of these emergent industries and the fact that we're poised to actually be leaders in this space, not only within South Africa, but within the broader region as well, is absolutely exciting. Of course, the question always becomes, you know, what are the levers we need to pull on to make these not ideas, but actual deliverables that we can see changing the reality in our country. Tula, there might be business leaders listening to this conversation or watching our webinar who are still probably sitting on the sidelines, probably not as engaged. What can you share with them as words of encouragement as they listen in? And in particular, what would you describe as the best place to start for a business that's really wanting to embrace its ESG goals a little bit more firmly?
This is a very good question, Nozi. Thanks for it. I think embarking on a journey towards stronger ESG goals is a commendable and forward-thinking initiative for any business. The best place to start would be with a thoughtful and strategic approach, but I always think of three things. The first is that they can start by conducting a comprehensive assessment of their current business practices, identifying areas of strength and opportunities, and then make a sincere commitment to integrate ESG principles in their company's core values. I think that's the second would be to basically involve all key stakeholders, your employees, customers, suppliers, investors, you name them, in the process. And then understanding their expectations and concerns regarding their sustainability integration. The last one would be to set clear goals, and like establish clear and measurable goals that will align with the business's core values and industry standards. So these goals could include things like reducing carbon emissions, improving social responsibility, or enhancing government practices as well. And then setting specific time-bound targets that provides as a roadmap for progress. And I think Nedbank is one of the leading role players in this sector, especially when it comes to their ESG goals. You can see that they follow their due diligence in essence.
Yeah, I was expecting a bit of a smile on Mark's face on the back of that, but it's okay. I think he's in he's in deep contemplation. But I think that's a really solid three-step process that you've shared with us, Tula. Assessment, involving your key stakeholders, and of course, then setting out your clear goals so that you can get started on your journey. So at the end of it all, I think it all comes back to action. And, you know, we are arriving now at a place where we're wrapping up the calendar year, but business is also looking to closing off their financial year with the beginning of 2024 in that first quarter. And as we do that, maybe what could be really useful is thinking about our priorities and what priorities we could really bring to the forefront as we prepare for a new financial year. Nick, I'm going to start off with you. What do you think is the one thing we should put at the forefront as we embrace green and sustainable solutions for business, as we ready ourselves for a new slate and a new year?
I think it would be energy security. Obviously, there's a 15-year-old topic in South Africa because our first power cut started in 2007, 2008. So this is nothing new, but we can't grow our economy and our businesses until we restore energy security. So that I think should be next year's number one goal. We have a long way to go there. We have a shortfall of about 4 to 6 gigawatts of reliable generating capacity. And that's actually only going to grow because another 5 of our coal-fired power plants are scheduled to reach their normal end of life over the next couple of years. So we have a real risk that shortage of energy supply, as much as we're adding new capacity, it's not enough to make up for what's being gradually retired from the system. And also just ensuring that as we go about restoring energy security, we solving other problems like obviously losing access to export markets if we remain extremely reliant on fossil fuel power. South Africa is one of the most carbon intensive economies in the world, and that's going to penalize all of our exporters as carbon border taxes come into play. So it's going about energy security in a way that restores energy security, keeps the cost of power low, and as we all know, solar and wind are by far the cheapest sources of new generating capacity in South Africa and in the world. And every megawatt of rooftop solar that we add gets us that little bit closer to restoring energy security. So that it's got to all be about energy security next year.
Yeah, it's a big priority, energy security. But I think the other thing you've raised, Nick, is the cost of doing nothing. And that's one of the big things that I've taken away from your contribution. And if we don't apply ourselves to that, then we must be ready to face the consequences, and we can still do something about that. Tula, what's on the horizon for businesses that you work on in your view, and what should they be putting on their horizon as we start a new year?
I think, Nozi, this is a broad question, but I'll answer it in this way. So, as I've mentioned, if you look at businesses implementing solar PV rooftops, so there's now innovative finance in that regard where it doesn't need or has zero capital access, and then you can either go through power purchasing or lease agreements. And then if you look at agri, I think we've seen or witnessed floods in KZN, the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape, and then there's also the prolonged droughts in the Eastern, Western, and Northern Cape. That could be seen as a negative, but in a sense, that is a positive because businesses can be able to invest in technologies and practices that, in the long run, are able to uplift us from such, I'd say, negativity if we look at that. But there is investment opportunities to technologies in that sector. And then I think when you look at waste to agri as well, I think Hermetia elections or the black soldier fly, there's quite a lot of uptake in that regard. And then the Western Cape is actually leading in this. However, I would say that if there are businesses who are interested to see what's more in the industries, especially in water, in agri, in the electric vehicle space as well. They can tap into some of our resources on the Green Cape website to see some of the case studies and industry briefs and market intelligence, and they would be able to access mostly those industry insights.
I mean, you've given us a lot in that response, Tula, but I must say one of the things that's very exciting to hear is that there is a reservoir of knowledge that exists where people can get market intelligence, can get case studies, can access briefs to really empower themselves with knowledge. And you've spoken about a lot of opportunities from technology to finance to the agricultural sector and so on and so forth. So lots to choose from when we think about those priorities. Mark, let's give you the last word. What would you put at the top of the agenda as we transition into a new year?
I would have a very, or what I would say to our listeners and viewers is that one must consider climate resilience and climate risk as a holistic problem and see how it can provide your business with a competitive edge. Now, a lot of people look at me all funny and say, well, we're talking about compliance here and we're talking about droughts and goodness knows what all type of thing. But every cloud has a silver lining. And I firmly believe that sustainability is giving clients a competitive edge. And the reason that I'm saying that is once you've built climate risk or sustainability into your core of your business, your operations, your everything that you do to make it sustainability, then you turn to innovation and transform your business so that you deliver products that your clients are willing to buy. Think of large tenders, think of large corporate acquisitions and things where they are also looking at how can they reduce their carbon emissions upstream, downstream, and for themselves. And the first place you're going to look at is you don't want to import a whole lot of carbon into your business because the steel that you're importing or the whatever it may be, the motor, the vehicles or whatever it is, use dirty energy or dirty processes to get the process going. Nick referred to it as well. More and more European countries are looking at this border carbon tax, and they're going to put a surcharge on your goods and say you're using far too much carbon, or you're too reliant on it. We're not going to let your products go in competitively because they don't want to import it. Then have a look at your client base as such. A lot of clients, especially the younger generation, are looking very much towards businesses that are sustainable, that have the right ethos and the right approach to things, saying that this is their planet that they've got to inherit, and they are not going to stand by and assist in the destruction thereof or the pollution thereof. And then third of all is just make your business competitive through cost savings. Sustainability is often much cheaper. And, what I always say to people is one man's rubbish is another man's treasure. Just think of those offcuts or the filings or the produce that comes off the side that is no longer viable or no longer usable in your process, but somebody else can buy it and change it into something else. You can make money out of that. So look at it with an open mind and then say, how can we do this? As a bank, we've just realized, well, not just realized, we've realized right from the beginning that this green economy is a massive economy. And if we don't bring in our clients and we don't bring in the installers and the suppliers and the manufacturers and our own suppliers and that, you're going to miss out on such a big opportunity. I think this is, as terrible as it is, it's just opening up the doors to saving the planet and making business that much more competitive.
Yeah, it's an excellent close for us, Mark. And I think you've hit the three Ps beautifully as we talk about the invitation to reimagine our products. And of course, competitive advantage underlying that, the opportunity to reimagine our people and how we speak to our new clients and even our new employees. And of course, to do that with the planet in mind. So it is about product, people, and planet all coming together. And I think one of the biggest things that I've taken from this conversation is that this is the gateway to prosperity, not only for South Africa, but for the continent and the world at large. So it's been a lot of peace coming through at the top of and at the end of our conversation. And unfortunately, I think we've also come to the end, and it feels like it's gone by a little bit too quickly. But I do want to say a massive thank you to Mark, to Nick, to Tula for joining us, and to thank you for joining us and tuning in to Talking Green. That is, of course, our Talking Green webinar on business sustainability in partnership with Nedbank Commercial Banking. My name is Nozipo Shabalala. Thank you for joining us.